Hello everyone, so Louise again here with video number 2, building on work that you should have already done. What I wanted to do in the video today is just pull together some of the things that you should have been looking at on your own, hopefully explaining things a little bit more, and just pointing you in the direction of some key debates and arguments as well. Okay, right, so what you've been looking at today is Weimar Germany. Okay, now we're going to spend a couple of lessons looking at Weimar Germany, and we're building up towards the question of why is Hitler able to come to power in 1933? Why does the Weimar regime not succeed, essentially? And the issue that you've been looking at today is the issue of political extremism in Weimar Germany. Okay, it's quite a problem, and it is a key factor that helps us understand why this regime doesn't succeed and why Hitler operates out of it. Okay, now one of the things that I just wanted to kind of run through with you first of all is you've had this slide today in the PowerPoint that you were looking at, and what's really important is to recognise that political extremism is quite a persistent problem for the Weimar government, but it kind of clusters as a problem around particular points in time. So what this timeline here does is it breaks down Weimar Germany from 1918 to 1933 into 3 different stages. So you have the early years up to 1923, which historians kind of label the chaos years. You have the middle chunk of time, where everything kind of settles down a little bit, so much so that historians label it the golden years. And then obviously in 1929 we've got the Wall Street crash, and that marks the beginning of the final phase of the Weimar regime that's known here as the collapse of democracy. And if you look at this timeline, what we see in this period is that political extremism is high when things are unsettled in Germany. So in the early part of the government, when we've got a significant amount of issues that you should have started to look into, we get high political extremism, and then following the crisis of the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression, we get high political extremism as well. Okay. However, what you've started to look at today should point you towards a key issue here, which is that it's not just right-wing extremism. It's not just the Nazis that are the extremist groups operating in this time. We've got a kind of split on the political spectrum here, and that links into a key term that's it's a key argument, it's a key debate used by historians about this period, and that is this one here, that German politics is polarised. Okay, we've got a polarisation of politics in Weimar Germany, where we've got extremist activity from both wings of the political spectrum. So we have, what you should have started to look into today with the Spartacist Rising, is we've got left-wing communist extremist activity, and then we've got right-wing fascist extremist activity as well. And again, some of the things that you've looked at today will have touched upon the Nazi Party, although you're going to do more on that in the next lesson. But things like the Kapp Putsch, for example, that you've looked at today would fit within this right-wing fascist type extremism. Okay, so in both of those periods, you've mainly today just been focused on the chaos years bit, but in both of those periods, what we see is this polarisation. It's not just about right-wing extremism, we've got left-wing extremism that's really important as well. However, what is very important, and you should have started to pick up on, is that it's the right-wing extremism in Germany that becomes more significant. Obviously, we're talking about the build-up to Hitler coming to power, a right-wing fascist group coming to power. So it is that side of the split, the polarisation, that does better. And one of the questions that you had today to think about was, why do we think that is? And I thought it would be interesting just to pull that together for you slightly, because there might be a few things that you hadn't considered. Why is it fascism over communism that's more successful in Weimar Germany? So here I've got a couple of factors just to run through. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. The first 2 I've coloured in blue to represent the right wing, And these are two factors that kind of work in, they are strengths of the right-wing groups, I suppose. Okay, so if we have a look there, one of the things that definitely benefits the right wing in Germany is Germany's history. Okay, so if you think of Germany before the First World War, it was a militaristic, authoritarian, right-wing monarchy that was in charge. Okay, we had the Kaiser, for example, didn't we? And German society was very much based around those traditions. The military, authority of the leader. It wasn't as strong a monarchy as, say, we had in Russia with the Tsars. So the Kaiser didn't have the same level of authority as the Tsars did in Russia. But the German people were used to that style of leadership. A leader that was strong, a country that really embraced its military and took pride in that. Okay, and that naturally benefits the right-wing groups a little bit more than it does the left-wing groups. Second factor, okay, that I've got there, is that the fascist groups, like I've just said, they kind of embrace the militaristic side of Germany. So, for example, you might have come across in your work today a group called the Freikorps. Now, the Freikorps were really important in this chaos period. They were ex-soldiers. Before the Treaty of Versailles stripped Germany of a lot of its weaponry, the Freikorps kind of illegally took tanks and guns and weapons with them to try and maintain arms in Germany. And this group very much kind of embodied the anger and the humiliation at the end of the war and the Treaty of Versailles. The government actually relied on this group to help put down the Spartacist Rising, the communist rebellion. So that kind of gave a bit more legitimacy to the right wing as well. So that kind of explains why the German people were more inclined to lean to the right maybe than they were the left. Okay, dealing with the left then. Now, one thing that I think that's really interesting, because it ties with our Russia module, is that 1918, end of the war, we've just had a communist revolution in Russia. So you might have thought that the communist groups in Germany would have had a really strong friend and ally in Bolshevik communist Russia. And they did to an extent. So, for example, Rosa Luxemburg, one of the Spartacist leaders, she was in regular communication with people like Lenin, knew him well. But the problem is that Russia is in such a dire position following the communist revolution in 1917 that they're not really able to offer any practical or real support. So that sort of weakens the communists in Germany. They haven't got people to back them up. And then a fourth point, which is something that we're going to touch a lot more when we start to talk about treatment of Jews in Germany, is that right-wing propaganda groups like the Nazis, for example, they were very keen to send out the message that there was some sort of connection between Jewishness and communism. Okay, and what they would do is they would pull on examples. So, for example, Karl Marx technically is Jewish. Leon Trotsky, one of the Bolshevik figures, has a Jewish background as well. And they used that to undermine the ideology of communism in Germany. Because there was again, we're going to touch on this a lot more, but there was an anti-Semitic trend that ran through Germany, and the right wing are exploiting that. So they're delegitimizing communism by claiming, well, if you're a communist, you're probably a Jew. And if you're a Jew, you're probably a communist. Okay, so all of those factors combined meant that fascism definitely did better, got more support than communism did throughout the 1920s. Okay, final thing that I wanted to just run through with you was the kind of the last thing that you were asked to do today, which was to start to think about what the most important factors are in the development of political extremism in Weimar Germany. So you were given 3 things to think about. I'm just going to run through a couple of the arguments that you could have made in support of each factor. Okay, you might have something different down, but these are just a couple of ideas that you could use if you were struggling. So, factor number 1, resentment of the Treaty of Versailles. So, I imagine a lot of you will have referred here to the anger that's generated by the Treaty of Versailles. People are furious, they are humiliated, and they are looking for somebody to blame. The right-wing groups exploit that anger. Okay, their central message is based around how unfair the Treaty of Versailles is, and that they are going to overturn the Treaty of Versailles. You just have to look at any of Hitler's early speeches in 1920, 1921 to find evidence of that. So they co-opt the anger of the Treaty of Versailles. Okay. Second factor, economic factors. Now, some of the economic problems that we will touch on, and you will start to touch on today, we've got reparations, which the Treaty of Versailles places on Germany, a huge burden. We've got hyperinflation in 1923. So again, in that chaos years era, we've got hyperinflation. And then towards the end of the period, I mentioned just before the Wall Street crash in 1929, and that causes a depression in Germany. Okay, so those are the economic issues, big economic issues that face this government. What that does is it increases anger, it increases the population looking for easy solutions, and political extremist groups often offer easy solutions to very complex problems. They give them somebody to blame. That generates more popularity for those groups. Okay, times of crisis always leads to a rise in extremism. And then finally, the new Weimar government itself. Okay, now this is quite a significant argument. There's the dog today. So, shut the door. First argument here links to what the German people are used to. So we said before, Germany has been an authoritarian regime under the Kaiser. That's what the German people were used to. The Weimar government is the first ever time they've attempted democracy. And all of these problems lead lots of people in Germany to believe that democracy is a weak form of government. Because why else can't we solve these big problems? Why else can't we solve the depression? Why else can't we solve the humiliation of Versailles? It's all because we have this weak democratic government. So people again look to the extremes to provide them with easy answers. Okay, so all of those things combined are relevant to why political extremism definitely grows throughout the 1920s in Germany. Okay, now, next lesson, you're going to delve much more into the development of the Nazi Party, the role of Hitler within that, but we're sticking on this trend still of what we've looked at today, of that Germany is a divided country, particularly in these early and later phases, where political extremist groups do really well. Okay? Right. I shall see you all later. Goodbye.